Hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to welcome you to this exciting panel today, which is on diverse narratives, representation, and inclusivity in literature. This panel will explore the importance of diverse representation in literature and the impact it has on readers, writers, and society as a whole. It will also cover topics like representation matters, inclusivity in publishing, intersectionality, and breaking stereotypes. We have very exciting guests on this panel. We have Abhishek Anicca. Abhishek is a writer, poet, and spoken word artist. He is the writer of The Grammar of My Body and a book of memoir essays of living with disability and chronic illness. An occasional actor, Abhishek has been writing, editing, and performing pieces for over a decade across mediums. We have Alina Gufran, who's a writer based between New Delhi and Goa. Her debut novel, No Place to Call My Own, is forthcoming with Westland Books in 2024. She holds an MA in filmmaking from Prague Film School. Her film Leela had its world premiere at the International Film Festival Rotterdam in 2024. Her fiction about female identity and its various dimensions found its form during her time in India, the Gulf, and Europe. And we have K. Vaishali. Vaishali is an author, speaker, and diversity and inclusion advocate based in Hyderabad. Her memoir, Homeless, Growing Up Lesbian and Dyslexic in India, published by Eura Press and Simon & Schuster in 2023, was shortlisted for the Rainbow Awards in the nonfiction category. She was the delegate for learning disabilities at the International Purple Fest 2023, a festival that celebrates people with disabilities and is organized by the government of Goa and the government of India. She works at a tech company writing documentation for their products and leading their LGBTQ plus business resource group for the Japan and Asia Pacific region. She's the host of the podcast Queeriest Connections, available on Spotify and Amazon Music. Saurabh Sharma will be moderating this session. Saurabh Sharma is a Delhi-based queer writer and freelance journalist. They review books and interview authors for a variety of publications. Thank you everyone for joining us. I now request Saurabh to take over from here.
Thank you, Namrata. Thank you. And thank you all of you for agreeing to do this. I am really excited and honored and humbled that you all have joined for this discussion. So my first question would be, in what sort of ways, stereotypes do damage? That would be my first question to all of you. You can begin in alphabetical order, and what I want you to focus in your answers, your answers could focus on select behaviors that you feel do utmost damage, and if at all can relate them with the literature that you have worked on, or something that you have found and felt seen while reading some of the others' work, that would be great. So we can begin with Abhishek, if that works.
So for me, I think one of the biggest things was, you know, uh, whatever I had read on disability was about overcoming in some ways. So everyone was always overcoming something. And of course, there was too much inspiration porn. Most of the books actually seem like a marketing gig where someone had a disability and they overcame it. They did something great, which is awesome, but it doesn't really speak of the lives that we live, everyday lives that we live. And I reached a stage where I realized that people actually want inspiration from. People want to tell you that, oh, great, you are here. That is, it's just amazing that you are here, and just you being here makes a lot of difference. And that's a lie. Me being in any place only means my rarity in places means that there is no accessibility, there's no access, there's a lot of gatekeeping everywhere. So disabled people like me can't make it, you know. So I think from that perspective, I wanted to write about just day-to-day living experiences with disability and chronic illness without any filter. There are too many filters when we talk about disability and chronic illness. So my goal was to just not have any filters, to practice something I call radical vulnerability. But it's a fancy term for just saying that I will have no filters and I will talk about whatever I experience throughout in day-to-day lives. And my journey started with talking about things like diapers and incontinence, which are part of many disabled lives, but people don't talk about it. And when I started talking, I found out that many disabled people have these day-to-day struggles, and they started opening up and they talked to me about it. I've had so many conversations about diaper brands and what to wear and things like that. And things I never imagined that would be part of just normal everyday conversations. So for me, that cliche, the cliche, and I think, but there is no defeating inspiration porn, because we live in the era of dopamine, and everyone wants a good dopamine rush. Everyone wants to feel good about overcoming story. And no wonder most of the heroes from disability community are also Paralympians or people sports who made in sports, which is like kudos to them. But whenever a journalist talks to them, and after the initial, you know, amazement at their achievement, if they start talking about their day-to-day lives, they will realize they actually it's a pretty terrible country to live in for disabled people. And so that story is somehow always untold. People also don't want to tell it because vulnerability is not doesn't exactly makes you attractive in this world, especially in India. It hardly there's a small circle, there's a small ecosystem where vulnerability is kind of acknowledged, but outside of it, it doesn't matter. So yeah, that thing I wanted to write something different. It's not that I wouldn't read anything which is inspirational. It's fine. I think disabled people also need a lot of validation. So, and I understand that. So they're free to write, but I don't personally feel that writing inspiration, any kind of inspirational anecdote or any kind of overcoming story does justice to my experiences.
Thank you, Abhishek. Thank you for signaling that possibility that the biggest stereotype here is actually the story that goes from struggle to inspiring purchase in a few people, and that's how most of the stories get accepted. And beyond that, there is no other possibility to tell the way that you would like to tell the story. And this is where the gatekeeping and everything, and from validation to what the larger society wants you to write comes in. So I'll move to Alina now. Would you like to share something? Do you want me to repeat the question? Or
No, I think I remember it. Yeah.
Great. Okay, please go ahead.
Yeah. Yes, I was just sort of thinking along these lines. I think in my particular writing process, it's quite inward looking and internal. And even though on a craft level, the lens is turned outwards, but I think just in terms of the devices I use, whether it's like, let's say in first person, or whether it's, I feel like my characters are not stand-ins for ideas. They're whole people by themselves, which is no comment on whether we're using a character as a stand-in for an idea makes it a better novel or a lesser novel. But I tend to not approach my work like that. And so these conversations about stereotypes and this pigeonholing is a conversation in retrospect. It's always in hindsight for me. It's never when I'm actually creating the work. And in hindsight, when I've taken a bit of a forensic eye to my work from a more political lens and not a craft lens, I've realized that one of the driving factors behind the characters I create is, of course, the most obvious is like influenced by lived experience, but it's just the ability, and I think that's where literature can really play sort of its true role, is to create somebody in their inherent messiness and contradiction. Right now, whether you're a woman or Muslim or brown, etc., these are all themes that permeate through my novel. Of course, these are all locations, so to speak, that permeate through my novel. But to me, they don't take precedence. To me, the precedence is taken by the character, Sophia. Who is Sophia, right? She comes with her own set of contradictions and complexities, so to speak. And now, obviously, the wish is that somebody sitting somewhere reads it and they're able to see themselves in it. But for me to be able to do justice to the work, I have to do justice to Sophia's story, right? And I think what happens, so for me, that's a very internal process as a writer. What happens sometimes when you put your work out there and it is being reviewed or evaluated, not enjoyed, not being read for leisure, but evaluated, there's always this sense of like, is this the minority experience, you know, which I am Muslim culturally. I just don't identify with that statement at all. Because for me, I'm like, oh, this is my only experience. Now, you looking at it as a minority experience is your way of compartmentalizing life in very neat little boxes. It serves you. It's not a narrative that serves me. And then when you uncover that a little bit, you're like, okay, it's not a monolith. There are varied experiences. I mean, growing up, I was hard pressed to find a very like modern Muslim experience, you know, where the person was contending with what it means to be alive in the 21st century. You know, it's not, of course, that is the lens, the social and political lens informs each experience. But I would like to talk about a character waking up in the morning and going for a walk and then getting into an argument at a coffee shop, and kind of chronicling that more than sort of a explicit statement, because I think the statement's in the subtext. And I think that's what everyone's kind of caught on to as well. So that's what I personally prefer, because in terms of identity markers, it's, you know, I have a big problem with the minority body and experience being a site of spectacle where things are happening to them, you know. And this is something you will see in narratives over the years. Something is always happening to a woman or happening to a Muslim woman. And again, I do want to reiterate, this was all in hindsight. So I think one of the biggest ways where, for lack of a better word, I could exercise agency in my work was to just write the very mundane existence of a woman in painful detail and to be able to do justice to that vis-a-vis the story. I think that truly becomes my role, or at least the way I see it as a fiction writer. I don't know if that answers your question, but
It does. It was really insightful, and you actually shed a light on the consumerism aspect of it. You know, because how one kind of, because at the end of the day, you were there to tell a story, and those listeners, if they have preconceived notions and ideas about what kind of a story is this, and that is what is going to make them excited about receiving your work. So yeah, this is how it works, and kudos to the point on how people see organizations of stories in their lives. Like, this is a Muslim story, this is story of a Muslim woman, as if there's only one Muslim woman they'll ever know in their lives. So thank you for that. With this, I'll go to Vaishali, because this is precisely the conversation that we had last year when we were discussing about homeless, that there's a particular kind of a story, and this is the story that people from the, for the lack of a better word, majority, tend to access what minority viewpoint is, and that becomes their truth. And I think it's also very lazy, not even boring. It's also very lazy to think of a particular story and extrapolate it and make it true for everybody. So Vishali, your take on stereotypes.
I think stereotypes, there's so many stereotypes and they're all so annoying, but there are some that are so oversweeping, right? Like those that are like for example, when people say lesbians either hate men or want to be men, like the whole experience of being a lesbian has nothing to do with men, and that's the point. It's not about hating them or wanting to be them, but I think that's projection by people, or it's just the general like discourse on patriarchy that sort of, they some people just can't imagine lives without men in it, and they have to like want to put men into those lives and try to see what kind of relationships form, and they make so many assumptions. Well, you can live life without, men playing a big part in it. It's not a big deal, honestly. So yeah, it's kind of weird that anyone would think that our experience comes from that hate and like, or comes from that want to be men. I think, none of the books I've read that have been written by lesbians have ever even mentioned that. It's never about what we feel about men, it's always about what we feel about women. And there are many complicated relationships there, a lot of mommy issues for sure. But that's generally, how it is. And to touch upon the disability side of things as well, I love what Abhishek said. I think, we want mediocre disabled people to exist and take space and talk about their experiences. We don't all want to be like shooting for the stars and trying to do something, climbing Everest and whatnot. Uh, but, another thing, like I don't know if it's a stereotype, but just the fact that, disabled people being less than is such a harmful thing in itself. Like even the word disabled, it should be disabled, differently abled, right? I mean, that again, like that's another, a lot of people don't relate with that, but like I feel like it's the world that has made us this way. It's not that we were born lacking something. The world lacks support, and especially India as a country, like Abhishek said, lacks that support that could have been easily provided by our society that we didn't focus on. And that's the reason why a lot of us live lives where we can't experience things to its fullest. So yeah.
Thank you, Vaishali. Thank you for turning it outwards, that instead of us telling me that I like something, do you think that you lack a vision and understanding of what my capabilities are? So thank you for that. And now we'll move to, we'll discuss each and everything individually. So my first question would be to Abhishek. Abhishek, in your book, The Grammar of My Body, also note about internalized shame. I wanted you to reflect on it and share that how you sort of fought that to find your own voice. Because I think when you come from when you come from a place where your story needs to be socialized more, there's also self-censorship that comes in a way because of that shame, and it disallows you to tell the story. So your viewpoints on that.
The shame never goes away. It's always a part of you. And yeah, so it's basically it's always you are always on the edge because in terms of shame, because here you have a story, you have told it even after telling it, but you're not sure whom to share it with. Should I share it with all my school friends in Patna, where I live right now? Should I share it with all my relatives who don't know the extent of my disability, or do I share every detail with? Do I want to share every detail with everyone? But you reach a point where you realize that there's no point in fighting shame. You have to just embrace it, and once you embrace it, it is no longer shame. There's no shame in my facets of my body, uh, and that also enables me to kind of, this frees me from a lot of normative things, like the of a how normative idea of how I look, or sexuality, or things like that. I think it freed me. Shame will always be there, because no matter where you are, no matter you are straight, poor, no matter you are disabled, labeled, uh, there's always the normative. There are new normatives created everywhere. So you are never free from shame. You are never free from shame. I remember going to a choir party where I was objectified because of my body, which is, fat, being a chub. And interesting thing was, I wasn't offended, but it was curious because I could have been offended. I could have been shamed. It's so easy, to be shamed. Uh, and this was a liberating space for me. But this is what it is. There will always be new norms of normative, and you will be judged according to that. Uh, but for me, the most, I'm still getting messages from friends who say, you talk about everything, and and that's always, I don't know how to take it, but I take it well, I think, because I say yes, I have to talk about everything, because my chronic illness, if I don't talk about what is the effect of my chronic illness on my day-to-day lives, on my body, then how can I talk about how can I present a narrative which will be that's not close to my truth. I have to speak my truth, no matter how flawed it is. No, and it is flawed because uh, it is my truth. It is completely my truth, and but even in that flawed truth, there is a reflection of how society operates, how rigid it is, how normative it is, how indifferent it is generally. No, it's not even within our silos. We think we are important. We are raising our voice and we are doing all that shit. No one cares. I know a lot of people who bought the grammar of my body but couldn't read it, which was not surprising. For them to step into that world is a very difficult task because it's a completely alien world to them, or a world which they don't want to actually acknowledge, because it's very difficult to say that everyone has those experiences for a day or two, but to have those experiences again and again, it almost seems like if I didn't know myself, I would say maybe it's pity porn of some sort. But because there's nothing which has not happened, and in fact, the only place of shame where I really filter things out is when I don't want to hurt people. So I completely filter out things about family, maybe another book when there is when I reach that stage, but I completely filter that out because the point again is to heal and not to hurt myself again and again, as well as people around me. So the point of writing for me basically always has been, till now. Now I want to do something else, but till now it has been to heal. And I don't think you can heal if you keep on pointing fingers and you keep on, because you are reliving your experiences again and again. If they are not pleasant, you can't do that over and over again. You have to. And because even if there is a world out there, no one will get your experience. People are not there ready to say, people are, most people who actually acknowledge that are doing it because they know you are part of an ecosystem where they have to acknowledge you, and they say, disabled stories matter. But they don't really get you, and they will never get you. Actually, it's very difficult because within disability everybody is different. So the only thing which actually binds us together is a common feeling of alienation and misunderstanding. That's the only thing which binds us. So despite different bodily experiences, we acknowledge that, okay, this is whatever is happening in the society is kind of ableist. And yet we also acknowledge that our will to live. So that is the only thing common. Otherwise, we have each of disabled body has their own unique experiences, and everyone has their own social circumstances.
Thank you, Abhishek. Thank you for sharing that how each and every positionality can, beget a different story, and that would be interesting to know in a variety of ways how we tend to hurt each other and sort of develop a language that tries to negotiate the different norms in which ways we can accept that this would be something that would not hurt us, or this is something that can help us heal. Because I remember I was chatting with one person on a dating app when it came to exchanging pictures. I shared mine, and the only response of this person was awful, and after that it was the garbage emoji, right? And in that, immediately I had nothing except to write LOL. Because and then but it hurt me so much that I kept on thinking about the sheer power, the immensity, and the carelessness of this person to use such a big word to reflect on how I look, so that whenever I think of who I am and how I look, I'll be remembering that word awful. So I think in the ways that this binary of shame and pride works, a lot of it has to do with what sort of negotiations that you you sort of try to broker between two parties, and even
Well,
after post facto rationalization. Yeah, go ahead.
with disabled people, it's not even like you are ugly. It's like you're brave to be here. So it's like you're brave, Congratulations on being here. Welcome. But
Yeah,
I'm not interested in you, of course, but welcome. So
yeah,
it's
but
yeah, it's a kind of the way it makes you feel about yourself is even because actually facts I can get. If a person tells me that you are unattractive, that is still, it hurts, but it is easy to digest. But if a person says, oh, thank you for being here, you are so brave, I really want to slap them. That's my first reaction. But you can't, so you move on, and that piles up. That shame piles up. More than anything, it's the more you try to live, the more you try to date, the more you try to be in love, the more you try to be out there, you hurt. You are full of you acquire shame through every act of self affirmation, because the world wants you to give you that shame. And so after a point in time, you either give up trying, or you just get used to the shame.
yeah, absolutely. And you're right about that thing that, oh, thank you for making it here. I remember in each and every conversation where, I would be invited as a token person to talk about experiences of non-binary people. It would be, thank you for existing. I said, come on, trust me, you would not like to exist that way, to be told that thank you for existing. I mean, that is your way of congratulating that I exist. Okay. Anyway, we'll move to Alina. Alina, congratulations on your debut novel, first of all. And I remember my friend telling me last year that we are publishing this fab debut novel, and I was like, I'm excited even I'm excited on the behalf of the publisher. So it's titled No Place to Call My Own, right? And I found that it's very interesting that it sits in contrast with Virginia Woolf's title, an essay, A Room of One's Own. I was thinking that if you would like to meditate on this location, South Asia, and an association of South Asian women with place, because the geography is important here, because the sort of norms that exist here determine the trajectory of the career trajectory or growth trajectory of women, because they continue to get displaced from one place to another, depending on several actors that they continue to be in conversation with every day, be it family, people outside, or the scrutinizing gaze of neighbors, or the policing nature of just about everybody. And then there are religious sites, or sites of that signal something else, and there is also religions group there. So I was thinking if you would like to share also on how one takes space in that matter, and how one finds that space in literature too.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think I will relate it back to the work and the novel itself and talk from that perspective a little bit, because I feel like I couldn't possibly speak for an idea, but I can speak for sort of the story and the character and the spaces the character occupies. This is a thought I've been sort of contending with for a while, in part due to my own experience of having to move around for pretty much my entire life, which which is essentially the idea that mobility or and migration are not equal. They're not the same thing necessarily, right? And what we might consider social mobility, or what we might consider sort of the reason why we move, or the spaces we want to transcend, can also come at a massive cost, and historically have come at a massive cost, right? And now I suppose, at least in my personal experience, a lot of that has been to contend with the baggage of displacement. And displacement occurs on many levels. It's physiological, it's psychological, it's geographical, of course. But I think in this particular book, and for this particular character, because displacement has been such a central theme of her experience and how she's sort of grown up and moved through the world. It's kind of interesting. It almost becomes sort of a pathology for her, wherein her engagement with the world, the way she tries to reclaim agency, is to kind of leave before its time, or it's to sort of like always have the threat of leaving in every sense, one foot out the door, which is to me was a very interesting kind of tension between what has happened in her life vis-a-vis how has she responded to those events and tried to reclaim power over it. Of course, we can take a hammer to it and be like, oh, psychologically, perhaps that's not the healthiest way to react. But to me, that's also, literature is a very interesting space where I feel compelled to kind of explore the decisions which aren't made from a place of morality, or the decisions which are selfish, or the decisions which are unapologetic. Those are the kind of choices I personally really enjoy as a writer, just to see what could emerge, just to see how they might impact the people in her life. And in terms of taking space, to me, to be able to write a woman who just does, frankly, whatever she wants with very little regard for consequence, or quite often even the feelings of others, is to me very interesting. Is that the right way to be? I have no one to comment on that. But it is definitely a reaction to the tension that you inhabit when you contend with the world from the particular location that she comes from, right? It could be objectification, it could be her religion, it could be, I mean, the various things. You said it yourself in the question, right? It happens and it plays out in micro moments through the day. And it changes from place to place and city to city and like location to location, from a bar to a bus stop to a beauty parlor, for example. But to me, those become very interesting devices to kind of see, what do these reactions mean? What can they mean? What is the meaning I want to imbue it with, and what is the meaning the reader can take away from it? Because sometimes those can be two very different experiences. And I'll illustrate this with an example. And I remember I'd gone to this writing workshop, and one of my sort of peers was like, I'd like your stories a lot more. And usually my narrators are women, right? And they were like, oh yeah, we just like your stories a lot more if your narrator wasn't such an asshole. And I found that to be just, that's a statement that's really stayed with me forever, and I sort of enjoy that. And I don't know, historically, it's just maybe the literature that I'm attracted to. For me, the idea, I don't like using the word rebellion, it's such a word like loaded with meaning. It's been co-opted by late stage capitalism. I simply can't contend with that word anymore. But there's also a certain humor that I think I like to explore in my characters, because in the face of the kind of relentless cruelty and indifference and absurdity of the world that we currently live in, to me, again, humor or dark humor becomes a very interesting device. The ability to like take yourself seriously when you're not meant to, and not take yourself seriously when you're absolutely meant to. And that's again a device I use a lot with this particular character. And I guess the hope is somewhere, to kind of illustrate with a small example, she's kind of hit rock bottom. She loses her job, this grant gets co-opted, her flatmate absconds in the middle of the night, it just she's in a bad way. And her response to it is to go to a party somewhere where she doesn't know anyone, in a room full of strangers, and go on a bit of a psychedelic trip. And like a lot of like sort of people reviewing it, like first readers were a bit like, I don't know, Alina, is that how she would really respond? And I was like, wouldn't she? I mean, why can't she? Why is it again that there is an image that she has to live up to? Nothing quite annoys me more than having to fulfill a kind of a moralistic promise. And I think there are two promises you make when you're kind of writing a story, right? Like one is the promise of the story and the novel itself. And one is kind of fulfilling the promise of like life. And I think that's the choice you contend with and choose. And I feel like those are the exciting decisions you can make as a writer. And to me, I get so steeped in the process that, and I don't know how valid or legit that is, but to me, that is quite literally the meaning of taking up space. Where beyond a point, I simply stop caring or acknowledging how it is being perceived. And I can even speak to it from a craft point of view, which is a concept that a lot of writers in the past have elaborated on, called the point of telling. So, for example, certain decisions, such as present tense, first person, reducing the distance constantly between the reader and the narrator, allows me to kind of like yank the reader and, throw them into the world of this person, whether they like it or not. Painful, not painful, they're just now in it for the ride, right? To me, that those also feel like ways to take up space in literature. The way I would narrate a story to my best friend at a bar would be very different as to how I might narrate the story to, let's say, my screenwriting professor at film school. And when I write, I try to go with the former. I don't need to elaborate on cultural references. The idea is that the person should be able to understand it, the reader. I don't, because she's just narrating it to her best friend. And that intimacy, when I create that between the reader and the narrator, I think allows for well, obviously a suspension of disbelief, but also a collapse between the inner and the outer. And to me, that's quite important as well. So I think for me, it ends up operating a little more on a psychological level more than anything else. And then the rest follows. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but.
No, that was really insightful. Thank you for this. And you remind me of 2, 3 things. First was the kind of way that you were treating the humor, way that reminded of Bandit Queen, Sparini Shroff, her debut novel. It was quite interesting. And yeah, I mean, that word rebellious, I mean, I know it's it's sort of I don't know. Personally, to me, it's a very self-defeating word. It is as Jay Devika rightly pointed out that it's a co-creation. It's a creation of that neoliberal self where this one particular person is at war with the world and believes that this person would win. Ultimately, it's a very I mean, false concept that we have sort of bought in. But yeah, anyway, but that's a result of several structures that play out, but not each of us have the ability to understand with a clear-sighted mindset that okay, I think that is a problem for me, not something that I feel congratulated about. And then I forgot there's something yeah, the audacity. I think you also mentioned in a way the audacity of a person to take a step which you feel like, okay, is this how you want to react? I think that it was a sort of a discussion where he said that this is how I claim space, that why can't she go out there and do whatever she want to do? Why is there a particular way? So I think that is how the question was framed, a particular way. There's only one way we understand how this should go. And when you disturb that, it sort of invites the reader to become a co-creator and have this dialogue with you. And they arrive at that landscape where you can imagine all of us taking space. So thank you for that. And I'm really looking forward to the book.
Thank you. Thank you.
Vaishali, now we'll come to homeless. I have said it and I'll repeat it that, and I do read freaking lot. I am yet to come across a memoir as eclectic and exciting as Vaishali is homeless. Vaishali, I wanted to know because in my experience, there was a particular format, a mold for people to tell their story, right? It had to be, as both Abhishek and Alina mentioned, a sort of a narrative that they should be familiar with. The narrative would be tragedy, right? Everybody excluded you. Everybody and past comments that were very I mean the that no one would really like to be at the receiving end of, and basically they wanted a sad story and to tell, and after that it becomes a triumph story. Right. So I just wanted to know how you sort of thought to break this mold and what sort of devices did you try to explore to break this mold. And do touch upon self-censorship as well, because I think a lot of aspects that you explore in your book, had you had a moment of doubt and explicitly made a decision to remove those, we would not have those insights into the kind of life that you had lived. So your thoughts.
Yeah. No, first of all, thanks for saying what you said about, what you thought of my memoir. I think that really encourages me. And I think the way the queer literature and in general, has been, especially the gay memoirs that have come out that you also touched upon. Um, I like to think of that similar to the immigration story that was there, that was published by, Indians who went abroad, Champaleri, that generation of writers. You're surrounded by as a gay person in India, you're surrounded by straight people. As an immigrant outside of India, you're surrounded by the people of the country you're in. So a lot of times you're telling your story in the way they would be receptive to. Like you're like constantly going around, every time I meet someone new, I come out to them, they ask me, how did I know? How did I meet my partner? Blah, blah. It's that story that you need to tell everyone, unfortunately, right? Because you're suddenly in a zoo, you're in a cage, and people are looking at you, and you sort of have to explain to them where you come from and, sort of just fill in the blanks for them. They already come with that narrative, right? Like, you being a gay person, you obviously would have gone through stuff, which is true to some extent, but, um, and you're so used to telling that story to others that, you sort of also think of writing when you write, or when you tell a story, you sort of say it in the same way. You sort of explain a lot, sort of think of, censor your story in a way, or structure your story in a way, like you said, with the triumph and the sadness and everything. And that and thankfully didn't happen to me because I didn't surround myself with straight people. I mean, it's an easy fix, right? I mean, just don't, if you're an extrovert, I'm sorry, but just don't be just on your own, or like, try to just don't do that to yourself. Anyway, and the other thing, I guess, also is like visualizing an audience, right? They say that in writing school, any writing course, you're supposed to visualize the ideal audience and write for them, which I think is pretty. It's the wrong way to write a memoir, at least. Like let's be honest. Memoirs, I think you have to write for yourself. That's when they, really sound true to me. So that's a very important thing, and it's a very hard thing to do. You're always thinking about what others would think when they read something. And again, like I had the fortunate experience of never showing people what I write. So that was never a question that lingered in my mind, because I would just write and just like, toss it off. So that's another thing people can do. Just don't show anyone. I know it's so exciting, right? You're like, oh my God, I wrote this thing. I want everyone to read it. I'm going to put it on my blog, or like send it to 1,000 people. Just don't. You're just inviting voices in your head that are going to keep telling you that this is this, this is that. A friend of mine would always imagine her mother's reaction to everything she writes. And I'm like, don't do that yourself. Nobody wants to think of our mother's reaction to anything, let alone what we write. So it's weird how, people do that. And it's just not helpful at all when you're writing your story. So that it's important to isolate it. And the good thing is, as a disabled person, as a queer person, you do face a lot of isolation. So you start at a point where you don't have to, go looking for isolation. It's given to you. So you could like own it, sort of like just stay in that space and tell your story. I don't know if this can be replicated, but that's what worked for me somehow, and that's how I wrote my book. And the question of self-censorship, I think when I was writing, it is so tempting to pass judgment on others, at least for me. I just, you just want to judge people's choices, judge people's opinions, sort of also rationalize people's opinions. Okay, they think this way because this happened to them, blah, blah, blah. So I don't want my book to be about that at all. So, I can psychoanalyze myself, go into like why I hold something irrational. If there's an irrational belief I hold, I want to, examine that, see where that comes from, why, etc. But when I'm talking about other people and the choices they made that affected me, I tried my best at least to not give in to the temptation of explaining them, explaining the choices or judging the choices, being hard on them, ranting. I was very conscious about not doing that because it's not my place. It's definitely not my place while I'm writing a book. Um, I can do that over drinks with my partner, but not really while writing. So yeah, that's what I did.
Great. And I loved it that, isolation comes across to us like as a gift that, okay, you don't have to really look forward to it. It'll be given to you. That's great. Thank you, all of you, for sharing your views on the questions. Now let's discuss about something sort of benchmarking of us, benchmarking of something that has broken a stereotype, itself becoming a stereotype, right? So there are certain books that become that, oh, that book broke all the norms and everything, and then you see for decades that norm being replicated, being accepted by each and every person. And particularly it has happened in publishing because as Vaishali was also noting, this gay memoirs, it's the same template. I mean, this is how their life started. The dancing was happening. There was they were mugged here and there, and they loved somebody, and this person ended up marrying a woman. That's all that was there to memoirs. And as if there was no other aspect. Of course, these things happen to most of us. That's not the case. The case is what all gets to be told in that narrative, right? These will be a few, let's say, I mean, milestones in your journey, but there were others as well. There was nothing else that you lived. There was no queer socializing in the washrooms, for example. The story that invites disgust among many people, that you people socialize in washrooms. Of course, that happens all the time. You also come here, heterosexual men, so don't judge there. So that's what I wanted to know about these benchmarking thing. And again, with that, what sort of help do you think is required, the sort of structures that are required to help assist development and production of this alternate viewpoints? This is a free pass. Anybody can go first. Just let me know.
Yeah. Basically, I think a lot of it is reflection of the society we have. Uh, there is within queerness, there is, are you queer enough? Are you gay enough? Are you lesbian enough? Are you disabled enough? Uh, the books are just catering to an audience. That's it. And a certain kind of gay stories work because there's a certain expectation and certain ways expected to be gay, bisexual, queer, lesbian, queer, whatever. There is complete gatekeeping which happens within queerness. So also straight world तो है ही वैसा, पर that and the same thing with disability also. These days, nowadays, we have lots of different kinds of invisible disability and things like that coming into the picture. But still, no one will take you. In fact, if till the point I hadn't developed a limp in my leg, no one would accept that I was a person with disability. I was a person born with rare disease, but it was only when I developed a limb people took me seriously as a disabled person. So, and still there is a hierarchy of who is more disabled, who is less disabled. So sadly, I think it works. All of these cliches work. All of these standardizations also work because all these expectations are created because society is like that. Our places, our spaces are like that, and they are not. I don't see them changing soon enough. But yeah, hopefully they will change. But I also think there is no once you divert from the normative and once you like Vaishali said, like when she stops thinking about what will who is the ideal reader for the ideal reader, there are no ideal readers for my book or her book. I don't think there are, and that's a good thing. That's a very good thing because I'm not here to convince able-bodied people to change their mind. I'm not here to, but I have not pushed the book anywhere, because I don't think it I can do it in the future when I write fiction. But when I'm writing about my life and all I'm trying to be is authentic, I can't ask a person to actually read my story and go through this process without them consenting to it, or without them willing to do it. And right now the society isn't actually, like, most of the people who are reading our books are part of our circles, part of our uh, echo chambers, whatever you call it. It's a beautiful place also. It's not that everything is bad, but it's a very small place. We know, we all echo each other, we all know each other, we all resonate, something resonates within us. It's a very difficult, tricky situation. So for me, I think the more the merrier is the way forward. Of course, there needs to be something new, something unique. And I think, but if it spreads out evenly, if there are more people who are given them across caste, class, across genders, people are like, they have the if they get the agency to get published, it will change. And it has changed in the last few years. I have seen that different stories coming out, and it will continue to, even like, I don't think I would have gotten published 5 years ago. I think it has all been, things have changed, and things will continue to change, hopefully for the better, and hopefully not. But market is the biggest dictator. I think a lot of American queer literature is so like mushy, like it's made for films. Actually, people write it for film, like to sell rights to a studio, because, but then you understand that that's the only way to earn money is writing. So I understand, completely empathize with them why they write such trash, because maybe it helps them to sell the rights. And love story, mushy romantic love stories are the way forward.
Great, but also there also exist like some indie press would come out with a book called Deep Sniff, right? A history of poppers. So yeah, there are always all sorts of books, and depends on which sort of sector of a particular segment of particular audience would like to socialize this message to a larger community, which is why it is very important when you discover a work, you talk about that work with others, so that it gets more visibility. As you rightly said, until unless you were limping, they didn't register to people that there could be a community issue. So visibility is sort of a double-edged sword. It can also kill you. It can also give more attraction to your work. Alina and Vaishali, any of you would like to go ahead and answer this question?
Yeah, I think it's also the way the industry, the publishing industry functions, or any creative industry, right? It's so much easier to make a Marvel movie than it is to make an art house film, right? There's a reason for that. There is a precedence of success, there's a precedence of, viewers, and you sort of use that to pitch a film using the same formula, giving it a new twist, right? That's how lazy people are these days. And that's also how it's, why should a creative person work harder for nothing, right? I mean, you want to make your own life easier. If you want to survive in this industry, you need to then see what people want to publish, what people want to show. I think that's reasonable. I wouldn't judge someone for that. And that's what happens in books as well. I think, when you're pitching your book, they always ask you, what is your book like? That's a question you have to answer. And they ask you in creative ways, like if you visualize your book in the bookshelf, what books will be near it, blah blah. And I don't know how to answer that. Like no book can, make sense to club my book. And but the publishers, they come with that marketing mindset. They want to market your book, so they want to, they already have readers for a particular book. They want to convert those readers into, readers of your book. And that mindset sort of then comes into the writers as well. Nobody wants to write new things, although that might sell even more, because of the novelty, but still they want to keep doing that same thing. And the other thing, other side of this is there so much dirt of literature for some, marginalized communities? Let's look at gay literature. That sometimes when you read something, right, you sort of relate to it so much, you also sort of highlight those aspects of your life a bit more. You also look at your life in that lens of that one book that you read. If we read 10 books that are, doing the same thing, we can have a more richer sort of imagination of our own lives. But when there's just that one book that you relate with so much, you sort of just take those elements, those themes, and you sort of look at your life that way. I mean, that's what literature does for a lot of us, right? It gives you that lens, it gives you a new way to look at your life. And you need to do that enough times for you to, then come to a place where then you can pick up the real themes that are strong and then work with them. But then when there aren't those, the reason why, when we have gay stories, we want gay people to tell those stories, because that's what straight people will do as well, right? When they are telling a gay story, they're just going to read another gay story and then, use that to write a story. But then sometimes we also end up doing the same thing because we don't get to read a lot more, or we don't get to see a lot more about our own lives.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vaishali, for highlighting that the system is this way, that how a novel thing can be produced when you all want is that, hey, this is not going to work out because there is no market for it. How does then one create an audience for the work? Alina, final comments. I believe you're on mute. Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Could you just maybe repeat the question once? I would just want to reflect on it a bit.
Yeah, so the question was, a sort of book that comes out and you initially it is labeled path breaking, right? It becomes a benchmark story, and then there's several decades are spent on chasing that kind of a story by all of the actors involved in a particular industry. It could be publishing, it could be cinema, it could be anywhere else, right? You sort of then unless there comes another path breaking benchmarking story that that people would want to see more of that. And then what Abhishek and Vaishali highlighted upon, right? That to even socialize that, hey, I have a story, would like to listen to it. The takers would instead be asking you the question that, whom do you think it is for? Because I don't think anybody is reading what you have written. So yeah. And what should be the what you feel should come across as assistant can assist you with to help break those boundaries? I mean, certain things that you feel could add to the repertoire or your tools that you can leverage to break these boundaries.
Yeah, I mean, this is a question that I've pretty much been on the receiving end of, especially who is this for, right? Since I started writing across mediums, because I started off as a screenwriter. I was always writing prose in like a dusty corner of my bedroom. Screenwriting is very much as prose is as well, but literature still has this kind of sanctity, I suppose, which screenwriting only doesn't, because it is a tool that is, fulfilling a director's vision at the end of the day. It's a craft unto itself, but it's not really the final product, for lack of a better word. So when I was working as a screenwriter in Bombay and like bits of Prague, this was definitely the question, right? Like, who is this story for? And this is a question that's come up lesser and lesser with my prose, which I think, I don't know, I would just say that I'm lucky. I'm also very aware of the fact that this story has come out in a moment in time. It's a very hyper contemporary story. There's a chapter set in the pandemic. There's a chapter that sort of explores the protests, set against the backdrop of the protest. So, of course, these markers become, it makes it a bit sort of easier to sell the work, I suppose. But strangely enough, it also makes it a lot harder, because when the work is that much of a response to the current moment, it can also feel a little too consuming, where a lot of people may not want to take that on. And that is also, those are responses I have gotten, right? Like, oh, it's too political, or perhaps it's too close to reality, and people don't want reality, people want an escape, and so on and so forth. So because I am a writer, I'm not in a position where I'm commissioning work. I feel like my answer to this will always be from that particular lens. But at least from the conversations I have with the people in the industry or the editors, or even the fact that we're all sitting here having this conversation, I think there is a more, like, definitely an increasing desire for interesting narratives and alternative narratives. I mean, I hate to call it that, but there is a desire to read good work, right? There is a huge gap between, and I think that again is a result and of the mechanics of the industry. There is a huge gap between where the editors are, who they're talking to, and where the writers are. Again, writers tend to be a little reclusive, etc. A lot of writers have gotten in touch with me who I know are creating really interesting work, but absolutely have no idea how to go about that pipeline of like agent to editor, etc. So some of these are genuinely just like, they feel quite logistical, almost in some way. Access, it's a lot about access. It's a lot about, the editors are like, man, I don't have any interesting writing coming my way. Writers are like, oh, editors don't want to entertain my work. And I'm like, what is happening here? Like, what is this? How is it even possible to bridge this possible gap? I think a couple of things I can confidently say, which has also been my experience, is that I don't want to use the word gatekeeping, but there is definitely, I mean, there is, of course, historically, there's always been gatekeeping, but there's also this thing of like, who are the people in the position of power, right? For example, Sangamitra saw something in my work, my editor at Westland, and decided to go ahead with it, which is unique to her relationship to the work. And she's very explicit about it. And to me, the more those particular conversations come out, the more kind of, it almost becomes like a confidence building exercise for writers as well. It's been quite often in the past where, of course, I mean, there's been endless rejections, right? That is a writer's life, where at least in the early days of my career, I would really personalize it and be like, but quite really, it just kind of boils down to the editorial vision and the editorial kind of perspective. So I don't really know how this can be bridged, but I do know that people are actively looking out for particular stories, or, and then there are also writers creating those stories. I absolutely have no idea how that can be bridged. But if there's any writer watching this, and I do want to say that people are on the lookout for that, and it's not as hostile as one would tend to believe. It can be hostile, of course, but for every moment of hostility, I personally have experienced a lot of camaraderie, a lot of openness, a lot of kind of almost hand-holding. So for example, that now that I'm in a position where I do understand the mechanics of the industry a little bit, I would very readily and easily share that information with people who have approached me, right? It's just, institutionally, I can't comment on it, but I suppose it's just what I can do, so to speak. In terms of commenting on how path-breaking a piece of work is, I feel like that's a marketing term. I really can't. Each piece is as unique as the next, and I read the works of my favorite authors, and I find commonalities and I find differences, but I'm never thinking of things like, oh, this was path-breaking. Is this more path-breaking? It's just not a conversation I've ever had with myself. And I think a true reader and somebody who really enjoys literature also doesn't tend to think like that. They tend to immerse themselves in the world and the character's journey. And yeah, again, bit of a tangent, but I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you, to highlight that, besides our own inhibitions and self-censorship and shame and everything, we can still fight everything and produce something that would be of value and for readers. And even that very attempt, that desire to produce a work, is also very radical and in itself a very motivating thing for anybody who is listening to all of you. So thank you for sharing your stories with us. Thank you for all the insightful answers to all the questions. I really do appreciate it. And I wish that all the people who are listening to us pick up a copy of The Grammar of the Body and Homeless and your forthcoming debut novel, Alina. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you. It was a brilliant discussion. After this video, I will add the details of your books, of your social media handles of each one of you for the viewers to see. Thank you so much for being a part of this discussion.